which brings us really to this next slide. And, this has also been a cause for concern over time in understanding really what items qualify as a serially managed asset. And as you'll note here, we're not talking about assets that meet a $5,000 threshold or greater or have other qualifiers associated to them. This is straight up, no matter what the value, if it's a serially managed asset, IUID is at the center of this as part of your obligation. So what this whole initiative had began with was to capture and register data across the Pentagon, both on the legacy side and on the defense contractor side, to manage all legacy assets and GFP and newly acquired items. And all three of these lanes are filled with, ongoing obligations being met day in and day out by industry and by the military today. It's the industry best practice, though, for quickly and efficiently identifying and marking and tracking these critical assets. So it's really, it's not too far from what we're used to going into a grocery or retail store and knowing that the barcode scanning at the checkout counter is also the same barcode being used to scan in the stockroom and scanned back at the manufacturer and all throughout the supply chain. That's what the DoD wants to leverage here, is that whether you're in maintenance and repair, whether you're in a new requisition coming in, whether you're something being disposed of, they want to be able to use this barcode to scan and quickly capture and know exactly what it is that they are using and handling as an item coming through their system. But because of that, and you can imagine the long life of some of these assets, you got to make sure that when you create your IUID mark, that it's durable enough of a mark to last the full life cycle of that item. And not for this session, but it needs to be verified and validated. You need to ensure that the integrity of that barcode is going to last the life of that item. If you want to take that offline with a sidebar, we've got tremendous resources to address that one offline. But the other thing to note too is that this is not just assets and end item deliverables, the end item itself that need the mark. It also is embedded items that make up that final assembly that are required to meet this marking and reporting standard, even in its parent-child assemblies or its kitted assemblies, and however it needs to come across. Sharrieff, I remember working with this helicopter manufacturer one time, and when we sat with them and their engineers looking at the different parts that make up these final assemblies, which was ultimately a helicopter, really the bill of material that made up that final assembly was in the order of 26,000 parts. This manufacturer thought that they actually only needed one IUID.
Right.
Create it, stick it on the tail, call it a day, or somewhere inside the helicopter, so that ultimately they met their IUID obligation. So they needed to go back and really review the contracts, see at what other levels within the assembly were crucial enough to track with the serially managed mandate, and make sure that they had a really clear parts list that they could provide down through to the manufacturing environment and put in the proper systems in which to make sure they were getting IUID marks on all the parts and components that made up that helicopter ultimately at the end. And so that became a sort of a new look that they had to acknowledge in terms of the way that they manage these contracts going forward.